All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're watching this. This is Captain Mangan, and this is the video version that we created of the Extremism Stand Down training. Now, we did an in-person version of this, but this is a 100% stand down. So we are creating this video version so that way anyone who is not able to attend the live training will be able to still get this information and be in compliance with this stand down training. Now, important to note, there are going to be some, not check-on learnings, but some passcodes that you need to pay attention to when they pop up. You're going to hear this delightful little chime noise, and then I'm going to say a passcode. There's going to be several of those periodically throughout this video training, so you just write those down, and then that indicates that you actually sat through and participated in the Extremism Stand Down training. Give that to your first line supervisor, and then that's how we will be tracking attendance and compliance with stand down. Key tasks. We are going to be discussing the oath of office and your responsibilities. We're going to be going down the legal and administrative permissible and impermissible behaviors, your responsibilities, your prohibitions, what you have to do, what is required for you to not do under Army regulations. And most importantly, we want to educate you to recognize any red flags and indicators of extremism so that way you're able to respond appropriately when you see those indicators. Now, the main takeaways that we want you to keep in mind here is that the majority of your peers, men and women who are working with you in the military, they're doing everything right. Same as most of you who are watching this video. We're not asking you to start spying on people, start doing some secret squirrel collections, trying to figure out what people are up to. No, we just want to empower you to be aware that when you do see a red flag, you do see indicators, that you're able to report that properly. All right. So to go over in detail some of the mandatory requirements and the prohibitions as laid out by regulation, we have this training video from the experts at Big Army JAG to run down these specific items.
Hello, I'm Major Sarah Nicholson, a professor of criminal law at the Judge Advocate General's Legal Center and School. This training video satisfies a portion of the Extremism Stand Down training requirement established by the Secretary of Defense's memo, dated 5 February 2021. This video will discuss impermissible behaviors related to extremism, as well as reporting responsibilities and procedures. We will not cover the discussion of the oath of office or the leader listening sections. In this training, we will discuss extremist organizations and the scope of activities prohibited by the Department of Defense and the Department of the Army. We will also cover the rules and guidance related to extremism and social media. We will then discuss relevant punitive articles under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And finally, we will cover the responsibilities and procedures for reporting prohibited conduct. This training is provided as part of the Secretary of Defense's stand down to address extremism in the ranks. On 5 February 2021, Secretary Austin directed commanding officers and supervisors to conduct a one-day stand down within 60 days to discuss the importance of the oath of office, a description of impermissible behaviors, and procedures for reporting. The two primary sources for the policy governing extremism are Department of Defense Instruction 1325.06 and Army Regulation 600-20. Department of Defense Instruction 1325.06 applies to all service members across the Department of Defense, and Army Regulation 600-20 applies specifically to soldiers. During this training, we will discuss both sources and how they apply to soldiers. The major takeaways from this training are that 1. Participation in extremist organizations or activities is prohibited by regulation and law. 2. All soldiers have a responsibility to report concerning behaviors to their chain of command or to law enforcement, which will then take appropriate steps to investigate and address reports of extremist activity. 3. Soldiers and leaders should familiarize themselves with the Army's policy and ask questions as needed. And finally, if you have any questions regarding the Army's policy for combating extremism, talk to your chain of command or your unit's legal advisor.
Participation in extremist organizations and activities by Army personnel is inconsistent with the responsibilities of military service. Such participation compromises unit cohesion and morale, negatively affects the public's trust in and perception of the Army, and detracts from our shared focus on mission accomplishment. It is critical for all soldiers to understand the types of activities that are prohibited so that they know what to reject and what to report. The first part of our discussion on impermissible behaviors will cover activities prohibited by paragraph 4-12 of Army Regulation 600-20, which supplements Department of Defense Instruction 1325.06. Department of Defense Instruction 1325.06 contains the Department of Defense's guidance for handling dissident and protest activities among members of the armed forces. It prohibits service members, including soldiers, from actively advocating for and actively participating in supremacist organizations and criminal ideology, doctrine, or causes. It also prohibits service members from active participation in organizations that advocate, promote, or engage in those ideologies, doctrines, or causes. The key phrases from the instruction are extremist organization and active participation, so let's look at how the Army defines those terms. Army Regulation 600-20 Paragraph 4-12 defines an extremist organization as a group that advocates for hatred, intolerance, or discrimination on the basis of certain protected statuses, such as race, sex, including gender identity, sexual orientation, and ethnicity. The Army's definition also includes groups or organizations that advocate for the use of force, violence, or unlawful means to deprive others of their rights. A group or organization that advocates for objectives or actions that are criminal, terroristic, seditious, or subversive also meets the definition of an extremist organization. The common theme to the definitions of extremist organization is that they operate counter to the Army's first priority, taking care of its people. Such organizations that support extremist ideologies, particularly those that undermine the oath we each took to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, have no place within the Army. Now that we have discussed categories of extremist organizations, we will cover the prohibition on active participation in those organizations. Penalties for violations of this prohibition include the full range of statutory and regulatory sanctions, both criminal and administrative, which we will discuss later. Soldiers are prohibited from the following non-exhaustive list of actions in support of extremist organizations or activities. Soldiers shall not participate in public demonstrations or rallies held by or in support of extremist organizations, to include participation through the promotion of such events via social media. Soldiers also must not attend a meeting or activity with knowledge that it involves an extremist cause when it constitutes a breach of law and order, it is likely to result in violence, it is in violation of off-limits sanctions or a commander's order, or it is in a foreign country. This prohibition on attendance applies to soldiers on and off duty and in or out of uniform. Soldiers are also prohibited from participating in fundraising activities in support of extremist organizations, to include collecting money on behalf of or for the benefit of the organization, and donating money to the organization, whether in person or online. Similarly, soldiers shall not receive financial assistance from any person who advocates for terrorism, subversion, or sedition, regardless of whether that person is associated with or a member of an extremist organization. Soldiers should be cautious of anyone they do not know who approaches them to discuss their military service and tries to offer financial assistance. If this happens, you should report the incident to your chain of command. Soldiers must not take active roles in or on behalf of an extremist organization, such as creating, organizing, or taking a visible leadership role in the organization. Be aware that this prohibition applies to in-person and online activities. Likewise, soldiers shall not conduct recruiting or training in support of an extremist organization. This prohibition applies to efforts that occur both on or off a military installation and both on and offline, regardless of whether the recruitment efforts focus on military or civilian personnel, or the training includes military or non-military topics. Active participation also includes distributing literature on or off a military installation or promoting information through cyber activity when the primary purpose and content of the literature concerns advocacy or support of extremist causes, organizations, or activities, and it appears that the literature presents a clear danger to the loyalty, discipline, or morale of military personnel, or that the distribution would materially interfere with the accomplishment of a military mission. Here, the terms literature and information can include items such as pamphlets or brochures, signs or posters, images with or without captions, and articles or write-ups. Soldiers and Department of the Army civilians must reject participation in such activities. With regard to soldiers, Department of Defense policy makes clear that commanders have the authority to employ the full range of administrative and disciplinary actions, including involuntary separation, dismissal, or even appropriate criminal prosecution against those who actively engage in such activity. Supervisors and leaders of all ranks must also take action to maintain good order and discipline and root out extremism. As we shift focus to social media and the internet, keep in mind the Army's think, type, post methodology. Think about the message being communicated and who could potentially view it. Type a communication that is consistent with the Army's values, and then post only those messages demonstrating dignity and respect for self and others. It is important to note that soldiers are responsible for the content they publish on all personal and public internet domains, to include social media platforms, blogs, or other websites. Army personnel who maintain a presence on the internet must always be mindful that their online activity could be perceived as representations of or endorsements by the Army. Participation in internet sites sponsored by extremist organizations and activities is inconsistent with the responsibilities of military service. All of the prohibition on active participation in extremist organizations that we have discussed extend to both in-person and online activities. Soldiers are also prohibited from browsing or visiting websites or engaging in cyber activities when on duty without official sanction that promote or advocate violence directed against the United States or Department of Defense, or that promote international terrorism or terrorist themes.
All right, this is passcode number 1 out of 5. And the passcode is Y87. Passcode is Yankee 87. Y87. This is passcode number 1 of 5.
Now we will cover a few examples of prohibited online activities. Soldiers may not tweet, retweet, share, or like posts or content on social media that solicits donations to an extremist organization or cause. Soldiers also may not engage in training or recruiting activity to include encouraging other soldiers to join via social media for an extremist organization. Soldiers may not like or follow any social media page of an extremist organization or leader while on duty or in the workplace. Finally, soldiers may not pursue personal writing for publication, whether by traditional written or by electronic means during duty hours, nor may they use government or non-appropriated fund property for this purpose, on or off duty, unless it is for official use or authorized purposes.
The Uniform Code of Military Justice is the foundation of military law and applies to service members worldwide. There are several punitive articles which prohibit extremism and extremist acts. We will now take a look at a few of these articles, but keep in mind that this list is by no means exhaustive. Article 81, Conspiracy. Under this article, a soldier could be held liable for all the offenses committed by co-conspirators while a member of the conspiracy, even if they are not present when the crime is committed. Article 82, Solicitation of Sedition. criminalizes the act of requesting or advising others to overthrow or cause the destruction of civilian authority. Article 92, failure to obey a lawful regulation could be charged where soldiers violate the prohibitions against extremism already discussed in this video. Army Regulation 600-20, paragraph 4-12 is punitive, which means soldiers can be punished under the UCMJ for violations. Actively participating in an extremist organization could result in a dishonorable discharge, 2 years confinement, reduction to E1, and total forfeiture of all pay and allowances. Article 94, mutiny and sedition are extremely serious crimes, as the death penalty is an authorized punishment. Mutiny is an attempt to overthrow military authority, while sedition is an attempt to overthrow or destroy lawful civilian authority, like the United States government. Article 115, communicating a threat, captures online threats as well as in-person threats. Threatening the use of explosive devices or biological agents carries a maximum punishment of 10 years confinement. Article 116, riot, does not criminalize peaceful protest or demonstrations. Riot refers to violent acts that cause terror to the public. The maximum punishment for participating in a riot is 10 years confinement. Article 117, provoking speech, could apply to a situation where a soldier used hateful speech like racial or ethnic slurs in the presence of and directed towards another soldier. Article 134, disloyal statements. This article applies to statements which are intended to promote disloyalty to the United States amongst other service members. As with communicating a threat, this article could apply to online conduct as well. An example of a disloyal statement could be telling other soldiers they should band together to overthrow the United States government because democracy is an inferior form of government. But general complaints about the Army do not constitute disloyal statements. Let us now take a look at potential penalties for violating these punitive articles. Depending on the nature of the incident or behavior, commanders have several options when evaluating the most appropriate response given individual circumstances and in consultation with their local legal office. The left side of your screen represents the most serious punishments, Article 15 and courts-martial. Article 15s can result in extra duty, loss of pay, restriction, and rank reduction. Article 15s can also remain in your official military personnel file, which could be visible to promotion boards. Courts-martial is the most serious option, and a finding of guilty results in a federal conviction which can follow a soldier for the rest of their life. Courts-martial can also result in confinement, dishonorable discharge, reduction to the lowest grade, and forfeiture of all pay and allowances. On the right side of the screen are administrative actions the commander may take, including administrative separation, GOMAR, bars to reenlistment, loss of security clearance, and counseling. Commanders can also order certain establishments be off limits to soldiers or order the removal of flags or other symbols which they determine could affect the good order and discipline of their unit.
Now that we have covered the Army's policy on extremism, let's discuss when and how to report extremism in the Army. As members of a people-first organization, soldiers must look out and care for one another in all circumstances. Caring for one another means safely preventing a battle buddy from making a poor choice if you can do so in a moral, legal, and ethical way. If you observe a coworker exhibiting concerning behaviors, you have a responsibility to report it through the chain of command or supervision to your local security manager or directly to the Insider Threat Program Office. Report issues of imminent threats or activities that may constitute criminal conduct to local law enforcement immediately. Let's first discuss when you should report potential extremism. If you observe a soldier actively participating in an extremist organization in a manner that you suspect violates the Uniform Code of Military Justice or the extremism policies of the Department of Defense or Department of the Army, report that soldier to a supervisor, commander, or military criminal investigator. If you suspect a soldier of being a member of an extremist organization or if the soldier makes statements of a violent nature, you should report it. Examples of reportable incidents include, but are not limited to, the following: statements advocating for the violent overthrow of the government, an attempt to recruit you or others to join an extremist organization, asking unit members, either in person or online, for money to support an extremist organization, or attending a meeting or rally of an extremist organization. This non-exhaustive list of reportable incidents shows only a few of the many situations when you should report suspected or observed extremism. You should also report any soldier's extremist behavior that does not rise to the level of a violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice or other applicable laws, or of the extremism policies of the Department of Defense or Department of the Army, because such behavior may still be a concern under the U.S. government's National Security Adjudicative Guidelines. Now that we have discussed when to report, let's discuss who can receive that report. Ultimately, to whom you report is not as important as just taking that crucial first step of telling someone. You can report to your first-line supervisor, your chain of command, or to CID. In the event that you suspect that a soldier is advocating violence towards the unit or the United States government, you can make an anonymous report to the I Salute Insider Threat hotline that is on the screen now. It can be difficult to report a fellow soldier, especially if they are a friend. Being a good soldier means taking care of each other and taking action when signs of trouble are observed, especially in situations when a soldier appears as if they are about to make a poor decision. By reporting the person, you might be helping them avoid a worse mistake. A failure to report has a negative impact on the command climate of a unit. Groups become polarized, corrosive behavior undermines confidence in the unit, and readiness is degraded as a result. Additionally, a failure to report takes away an opportunity to help a soldier or civilian, and it could place the soldier, the Army, and others at risk. Remember, reporting concerning behavior does not necessarily mean that a soldier will receive punitive action.
Service in the Army is voluntary, and it is a privilege that comes with added responsibilities and obligations. One of those obligations is to stand against extremism, as we should with anything that threatens to undermine good order and discipline, trust, and our culture of respect. Should you have any questions about this training, please speak with your leadership or legal advisor. Thank you for your time and attention to this video. This concludes our training.
All right, a quick touch on the DoD oath of office, and specifically focusing on, I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Now, that section of the oath of office is frequently twisted by extremists and extremist groups in order to justify extremist behavior, and just trying to send a message that, in order to defend the Constitution, we have to commit this or this type of act. That there are domestic enemies, and we have to commit violence against these domestic enemies that we've identified. And that, of course, is not in compliance with your responsibilities in the military. And just be aware that if you interact with anyone who's trying to twist that language of the oath of office, that's a red flag. All right, so as Jag went over and we'll touch on briefly, you cannot participate in groups that advocate any of the following here. The Army has kind of made these be the sort of broad outlines for extremist groups. If you happen to get an invite to a Facebook that's has some of these items floating around in their jokes and memes, then be aware that that's something to steer clear of. More specific prohibitions that they touched on there, especially things like fundraising and recruiting. That's a thing that can come up on social media. If you were to retweet or repost or something that is from a group that might be identified as an extremist group, that if you retweet a fundraising link for them, that's you fundraising for that group, and now you've run afoul of these prohibitions. So be aware of that when engaging in social media. And again, you're responsible for your social media posts, but a question that we had during the live training was whether you're responsible for your friends or your relatives' posts. And the Army hasn't indicated or put out that you're responsible for the posts of your friends. That there's not really sort of a guilt by association in that respect. Just be aware that for your posts on your social media accounts, that's what you are responsible for. So be aware of that. And here are some specific indicators. And one that I want to zero in on here is just the financial contribution to foreign charity and organization. That's going to be one. If you have like a clearance, that's one that gets zeroed in on. All of these are indicators, but especially when you get to the point where you know that a soldier, or maybe yourself even, are giving funds and doing fundraising, financial contributions to groups like these, that's a red flag that needs to be reported. All right, we're going to look at some soldiers that fell into extremism and kind of examine some of these case studies here. First off, we have Private First Class Brandon Russell. He actually started his own extremist group. So this was a kind of real clean-cut just neo-Nazi, anti-Semitic, just group that he was putting together with a few other soldiers and individuals. Ended up being arrested for a violent domestic incident that happened between him and other members of his group. He's currently serving a 5-year sentence. And you may recall this individual, who is also convicted, currently serving prison, ended up going down a road for extremism that ended up in ISIS. So be aware that extremism can lead to a bunch of different end states. The military isn't so much concerned about the individual group or which group, be it ISIS or neo-Nazi or anything else. But if you find yourself, going down a path, or see someone who's going down a path that ends in these groups, that's behavior that needs to be reported. This is one that I like to highlight here. This individual was sort of ostracized and teased and bullied by his unit. He had a cleft palate, and people would get onto him and bag on him for that. And that's the opposite of what we want to see in our Army family. We want to see, support, building people up, with a good support structure, a family plan with his unit. And apparently this soldier felt that the appropriate response was extremist activity. He was planning to utilize violence against his unit and against other government officials. And obviously, it's not good to be bullying other soldiers, but also an inappropriate response to bullying or being ostracized is engaging in extremist behavior. So this is also a good place to highlight that the family plan, the being in touch with your soldiers, keeping track of soldiers in between battle assemblies, that's how you, not only identify red flags and find indicators, but it's also how you prevent red flags and indicators for extremist behavior. That if you, behave appropriately and reach out and be a structure of support for other soldiers in your unit, then that can prevent them from latching on to, other paths that end in extremist behavior. Now, this was another individual who ended up embracing some neo-Nazi tenets. You can see that this individual was a little bit more blatant with his performance on social media. We don't have his identity because he was not actually charged with a criminal act, but he was removed from the military for violation of the regulations that JAG went over previously with us. And one more, this one, a private, started a neo-Nazi group with some other individuals. This gentleman actually went as far as to plan a attack on his unit when the unit was in transition to another location. And he has been incarcerated and separated from the military. So obviously, extremism can take a lot of forms, be it posting to social media, but planning a attack on your own unit is obviously extremist behavior. Now, I touched on it just a little bit before, but as far as preventing these things from happening, keeping soldiers from going down passive extremism, is some of the items here. Just create a system of support for your soldiers, keep in touch with your soldiers, know what's going on in their lives. And we don't need you to, call them every night and tuck them into bed, but we do need to be in touch with our personnel in between battle assemblies, know what's going on in their lives, so we can keep in touch with them and identify if they're in a hopeless space, if they're in kind of a twisted, bitter space that can end up with extremist behavior. All right, checkpoint number 2. This is Sierra 98. S as in Sierra 98. Checkpoint number 2 out of 5. And above and beyond that, you have a responsibility to report. Jag touched on that. Just tap on it again, that if you see any activities that you think are red flags from other soldiers, if you see them putting stuff on social media that sends up red flags, then you need to report that. You also need to self-report arrests. So if a person who's been arrested and he hasn't let his supervisor, first line leader know, if you've been arrested, you need to let us know. The Army's going to find out about it eventually. Do go ahead and self-report. And also, you have a duty to reject. Military members, veterans, reservists, we're all sort of, for some groups, extra targets that they know that some of us have had bad experiences with the Army or the U.S. government, and they want to twist that into their group's goals. They maybe want to take advantage of your military training. So be aware that individuals, if you're having a good time at the gun range or something, and Bubba comes up to you asking you, hey, do you want to come, join this type of group? We have these guys that get together. If an individual from an extremist group tries to recruit you, you have a duty to reject that. And then here are some of the opportunities, some of the avenues for reporting. And of course, your normal chain of command is part of that. But also, if you want to jump to any of these others, that's also appropriate. But please keep your chain of command and your first line leader apprised of any reporting or any red flags or indicators that you've witnessed. So on to a bit more of the fun stuff, going over some of the specific extremist organizations that you can be aware of and be on the lookout for. The Department of Defense has not provided a specific list of extremist organizations. They've just given us those broad outlines of groups that do this type of behavior, like racist, misogynist, etc. But I want to give you a little bit more clear guidelines and clear identification about some groups to be aware of. And the criteria for getting on this particular list is groups who are present at January 6th. So we're just going to start with the baseline that the events, the riot at the Capitol at January 6th was extremist behavior. I know that there's some people out there that even members of my own family that I've gotten to have discussions with about whether or not January 6th was extremist behavior or not. But we're just going to be starting at the baseline that this is extremist behavior. So if there's anybody who happens to feel a little bit differently, we're starting at the base line here that this is extremism. That's this is extremism. So, first group that I want to touch on here is Unite the Right. You remember in the news the events in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017. A lot of the individuals who showed up or first kind of came onto the scene at Charlottesville also were present at the Capitol on January 6th. You sort of see it as it's almost like a network group. Other individuals who went off to start other extremist groups started their public extremism at Charlottesville in 2017. And first sort of sprout off group from that is the Proud Boys. You may have seen these guys on the news. So many members are present at Charlottesville Unite the Right rally, and they are sort of developed as a counter group to Antifa, but kind of quickly devolved into a street fight gang. They're classified less as a militia, more of a street fight gang, which is to say that they will show up at protests, especially in like the Portland area, the Pacific Northwest. Will show up at protests and then get into fights with other protesters, just escalate things into violence. The sort of people that you might find them with bike locks or other improvised weapons at a scene. It's sort of a feeder group into more blatantly white supremacist groups. There are a lot of members and posts on social media that will indicate that they're Proud Boys and also they espouse white supremacist views, but you will also see it as their starting point into extremism through other more open and overt groups. And here's just some more statements that we've had online and on social media from Proud Boys. So you can see, even though Proud Boys don't really hold themselves out officially as a white supremacist group, many members will still not be afraid to post clearly white supremacist beliefs online. This one's an interesting one, anti-communist action. They have direct connection with that first domestic case study that we looked on. That Private Brandon Russell, he was also associated with this group. So you can see how it's sort of kind of a web a lot of time of relationships and networks where one extremist radical will sort of spread radicalization to others, and maybe even if they don't directly recruit, in this case, it's possible that these guys did some of the inspiration between Private Russell starting his own more blatantly white supremacist group. So these guys are touting themselves as anti-communist, but we know of at least one direct connection that they have with a white supremacist group. We touched earlier on the oath of office being twisted by extremist groups, and that's what we have with Oath Keepers. That this is a group that focuses explicitly on military and law enforcement personnel, and they focus on those lines that we touched on earlier about defending the Constitution, about fighting domestic enemies, that they will use those lines of the oath of office to justify their extremist actions. And we had many Oath Keepers present on January 6th, and several have been indicted already. So again, the group likes to zero in on the oath of office and use that as their justification, but they'll twist their interpretation into, this is why we're allowed to use violence against certain individuals. And of course, that is behavior that runs contrary to our responsibilities as members of the military. This is a interesting one that we'll do a little bit more deep dive on. That you may have heard about these guys in the news, the Boogaloo Boys. It's a bit more of a loose group. It's the only clear facet about them that you can see is anti-government behavior. They're usually, focused on gun rights and maybe a little bit more of a libertarian slant of just wanting less government regulation. And the behavior that you'll see out of individuals who identify with this group varies dramatically, because it can be anything from just only making jokes on the internet and that's it to straight up coordinating domestic terror attacks. And easy to spot these guys because they use Hawaiian shirts to self-identify. Now, this movement started entirely online. The Boogaloo is a reference to, like, it's an internet jokey way of referring to a sequel. So it's as early as 2012, you were seeing people use that term Boogaloo as reference to the Second American Civil War, and it's almost sort of just a jokey code to refer to that it's time to get violent about political views. So it sort of was born on the internet and then just sort of spiraled and grew online in the form of more memes and jokes from message boards like Reddit and 4chan on into bigger Facebook groups. And when I say bigger Facebook groups, I mean many thousands of individuals. So you started seeing less of the anonymous interaction on 4chan and Reddit, and then more of the front-facing online interaction on places like Facebook. And from there, these groups started getting together, doing in-person events, counter protests, and then eventually actions at more violent protests and at January 6th. So all of these groups have since been banned by Facebook. So that's some efforts by social media companies to try to decentralize coordinating efforts from this particular extremist organization. And another thing that makes the movement a little bit strange, you'll see there are some members out there that will just be openly white supremacists, and then there are others that will try to associate themselves with movements that you would identify as more progressive. So trying to support and identify with the LGBT community and the Black Lives Matter movement, saying that these are groups that also should arm themselves and also should be anti-government. And if you look at these list of names on this flag logo here on the right, you also see some names like Breonna Taylor, names that would be identified with the Black Lives Matter movement. And you're seeing the Boogaloo Boys extremist movement latch onto those names as, look, this is the government killing people, this is why we need to fight the government. And then you also see come and start it there on their logo, that kind of indicates that this isn't necessarily a self-defense type thing that they're referring to, like some militia groups or extremist groups will sort of espouse this notion that any extremist activity they perform is self-defense against the government. And then this sort of come and start it is sort of emphasizing that this is something that we're ready for, and for a lot of these individuals excited for, and just psyched about getting to engage in violence against the United States government.
To go check on an individual that's been shot with a fucking rubber bullet for standing there. As soon as we start giving a raid, they fucking shoot me. They hit us with fucking gas. How is this fucking legal?
That is what they hate.
Does that look like fucking non-violence? You know what's gonna happen when you fucking do this? That's why people loot, and that's why people fuck shit up. Because you treat everybody like this. You can't fucking blame them. It was fucking peaceful. You know when it got ugly? After 4 fucking hours of people standing there peacefully protesting, they got gassed, they got flashbang, they got shot with rubber bullets. What kind of fucking reaction do you think you're gonna get? A fucking handshake? The people are fucking tired. and you come out here and you continue to fucking do it and act like you're fucking trying to better the relations, fuck out of here. Wake up, stay in numbers, everybody needs to fucking unite. It's bullshit, dude. This is fucking all illegal protesting. That is fucking illegal.
So there you just have an example of, clearly this gentleman self-identifies with the Boogaloo movement. You see him there in his his Hawaiian shirt. He's got the vest on, has his rifle out. But he is at one of the George Floyd protests that took place over the course of the summer of 2020. So here you see him, you kind of watch this guy becoming more united with, the Black Lives Matter movement and sort of turning that into a more generalized anti-government movement that Black Lives Matter needs to unite, everyone needs to unite against what he's seeing as, oppressive government behavior. And, it's okay to, have the, be passionate about police brutality and trying to call out what you see as police inappropriate behavior, but rallying people into extremist behavior is not an appropriate response to that. And then above and beyond that, the most extreme versions we've had of Boogaloo movement has been, you may have seen in the news when it was taking place, this planned kidnapping of the governor of Michigan from several individuals associated with the Boogaloo movement. And I wasn't able to find the specific clips from Telegram messages, but there were also during the summer of 2020 some planned bombings to disrupt the interstates around major cities from Boogaloo boys. So it's a very decentralized group. So you just see, small groups of individuals latching together, and their ideologies may vary wildly from just, I want taxes to be lower, to I'm passionate about gun rights, to I want to kidnap a governor and bomb interstates. And then last group I'm going to touch on here is 3%ers. This one is a little also another vague one, where it's a lot of loose groups who will use this name and the iconography. So you'll see some of these on Facebook. You'll see some sort of state level or county level organizations of 3%ers. 3%ers is a reference to, there's this belief that only 3% of colonists fought the British during the Revolutionary War. So they're identifying themselves as, I'm the 3% that fight against oppressive tyranny. Well, there were so many of these people that showed up on January 6th that the national organization disbanded itself after the Capitol riot. See that quote there, that the DC riots and Capitol breaches hurt the Patriot movement drastically, and as a result has brought an end to our organization. So the national organization was so much wanted to distance themselves from the behavior that a lot of individuals had on January 6th that they just ended the organization. So, like I say, state and local levels still exist, but you'll also see people just you'll see individuals that still may be out wearing the t-shirts or having like stickers on their trucks, whatever else. And it can mean a lot of things to different people. So it may just mean that I identify that I would fight tyranny if tyranny showed up, but it also may mean that they identify more closely with these extreme militia groups. Like here we see this example from the California chapter of 3%ers. They identify as not being a malicious group, not being a militia group, and also call themselves as pro-government. But then you see that little addendum there: we're pro-government as long as the government abides by the Constitution. So still have their little bit of wiggle room they've worded in there for that they're willing to fight the U.S. government and engage in extremist behavior, engage in violence, if their definition of constitutional has been violated. And be on the lookout for this one, because this is a pretty common one. That patch you see on the right, the same day that we were doing the live training, I come in the gate of the Air Force Base, and the DOD police officer, so he's not military, he's DOD civilian, he's checking my ID, and on the front of his vest he has this patch on. So is he using that because he identifies with the extremist group, or because he identifies with the vague notion of fighting tyranny? Can't really say, but either way, we've got a responsibility to report that. So, we have to send a polite email to the base police department to let them know, hey, this joker is wearing a patch that showed up a lot, in the dang Capitol Rotunda on January 6th. So just be aware that that there are some common themes that you can see through a lot of these. You'll see a lot of anti-government sentiment. You see a lot of messaging about there's some sort of enemy and you have to fight this enemy, that there's a big danger that you need to defend yourself against, and that because you're defending yourself, you have no choice but to use violence, because that's how self-defense works. Someone's threatening you, and then you need to keep yourself safe. So that's sort of the justification you'll see from a lot of these groups. So if you see any of that language from, somebody on Facebook who wants you to join a group, or, old boy at the gun range who's trying to sidle up to you and get you to hang out with him and his buddies, be aware that, it doesn't necessarily mean that extremism is occurring, or that's an extremist group, but it sure is a common theme with a lot of these groups. All right, so that brings us to our last module that we're going to be going over here, which is extremism and online radicalization. So as you saw with a lot of those groups, they originate online. Some of them, all of them do the majority of their recruiting online, and some of them started out and at one point only existed online. So like how we went over with the Boogaloo Boys, they started with just references and jokes on message boards before they grew into what became an extremist group. So we're going to be examining what to be on the lookout for online. How does a normal person end up as an extremist through social media?
All right, passcode number 3. This is Z44. Z as in Zulu 44. And just one more note that needs to be addressed for this module, this block of training, is that the majority of people arrested and indicted after the events of January 6th were not in any official extremist groups. The majority, we're talking 80% plus of the people that showed up, were just normal people that were not a part of any of these groups, just mom and pops, business owners. So that's also what we're going to be looking at in this module, is how normal people like that became radicalized to such an extent.
And we're going to start off with a message from Lieutenant General Daniels, Commander of the Army Reserve.
Extremism is just not welcome in our force. We've got to treat everyone with dignity and respect. We've got to honor everyone's backgrounds, their diversity, what they bring, the strengths that they have to offer, their opinions, their cultures, their talents, everything that they are and they bring. We need to honor those and respect those and listen to them and figure out how we can leverage those to our greatest advantage. Those organizations that do so do better than those that don't. All soldiers and DoD civilians also need to remember that the military is an apolitical organization, and to keep that in mind as you do express yourself. If you see something happening that isn't living up to that standard, isn't living up to the Army values, then we need to take action. We need to stop it, we need to address it, we need to correct it, and then we move forward. The reasons that we're having these conversations is because they're necessary so that we do get to know our soldiers. We do know who is a part of my squad and what drives them, what motivates them, and how can I help that, and how can I keep that energy going. Where we're going isn't a quick fix. This is about changing culture. This is getting back to our Army culture. This is changing current climate to be much more proactive and reactive to those soldiers that have issues, that have complaints, that have been slighted, that have been subject to bias and or racism or extremism. It's going to take time to regain trust and to get all those bad experiences out to light so that they can be taken care of. But we really do need to go get back to the Army culture that we have had in the past of dignity and respect. Then we can get there again in the future. But that comes with the command climate and leaders taking charge and making sure that doesn't happen in their formations. The best I can hope for is that soldiers trust their leaders to take action. Everyone needs to listen to others, pay attention to them, be aware of them. That's a part of This Is My Squad. Hearing what others have to say, appreciating their backgrounds, where they came from, what strengths they bring, and then leveraging those to best advantage. So we are really trying to be ready now and shape tomorrow.
All right, now I have a quick exercise for you. So now that you watch that video, I want you to think to yourself, how inflammatory do you feel that video was? Like on a scale of 1 to 10, how inflammatory was that video? Like how angry did that video make you? Now, one more part to the exercise. Were you playing on your phone during that video? I definitely was. I was playing on my phone because that was, that could put you to sleep. I really appreciate the message, but, a little bit, we've all had to sit through things like that before. So this is about as calm and mild as a video that it gets. It's a sort of thing that'll make you feel a little bit sleepy sitting through it. Let's look at the YouTube comments. So why did all of these people think that that was inflammatory, and why did these people get enraged by this really mild and peaceful message from the commander of the Army Reserve? Let's take a look at some of these. Way to manage extremism is to engage in extreme voter fraud and then treat those who call it out as extremists. We must know the truth. Please investigate for it. I thought you were supposed to defend us from enemies foreign and domestic. There we see that line again, getting twisted from the oath of office. I thought the military fought for the Constitution, but I guess not. So here we're looking at, these aren't 3%ers, these aren't Boogaloo Boys, these are random people on YouTube. So we're going to be taking a look at how these normal people got radicalized, because look at this. This is fundamentally, if you're reacting like this to that meek and mild video, that's extremist behavior. So let's look at how that happened. Something that we want you to understand here is that extremism is on one end of a spectrum. We all have causes that we really care about, but the cause doesn't determine whether or not you've engaged in extremism. It's just how you behave in support of that cause. So this here is extremist behavior. Even though it's not hurting other people, it's a guy doing it to himself, that's extreme. There's no politician that you should set yourself on fire over. There's no cause that you should set yourself on fire over. And that's what we're wanting to look at here, is that it's okay to not like a current political administration and not like what they're doing. Setting yourself on fire is way beyond the line. And again, whatever the causes that you're supporting, that doesn't make you an extremist. What makes you an extremist is what you do in support of that cause. So let's look at a couple examples here. So on the top left there, it's okay to have personal beliefs that you can do what you want on public land and that you're able to graze your cattle on public land as you see fit. It's okay to believe that and support that cause. What is not okay and what is extremist behavior is to engage in an armed standoff with the Bureau of Land Management because you don't want to pay cattle grazing fees. You may remember those events several years ago, the standoff at Bundy Ranch. where you had a lot of anti-government supporters coming together around this rancher in order to engage in this heavily armed standoff against government agents. On the bottom left here, it is okay to support, the notion that American policing needs reform. It's okay to support that. What is not okay is to go on a shooting spree and murder 5 cops. You may recall the events of 2016, I believe it was, the Dallas shooter. There were a couple of high-profile events where police ended up killing a couple individuals, and this gentleman, rather than taking to the streets and protest, he decided to take to the streets with a rifle. That's extremist behavior. And then on the right here, it is perfectly fine to believe that environmentalism is important and that climate change needs our attention. What is not okay is in 2008 when the Earth Liberation Front set fire to a few homes in the Seattle area. So all of these are examples of causes that it's okay to support the cause, but there is no situation where it is appropriate to engage in this kind of extremist behavior. So one of the reasons that people will find themselves engaging in extremism or taking a cause that they care deeply about and then escalating that to extremism is radicalization through social media. And this is a Netflix documentary that I recommend and also is on the recommended materials for DoD's extremism training guidance, The Social Media Dilemma. It's an examination of how social media changes you, not just the effect that you do on the effects of what you do on social media, but the effects that social media have on you and have on your behavior and your thoughts. And I'm not sure if any of you have watched The Boys TV show on Amazon, but we're going to watch a quick clip of it here.
We're aware now and know how the system works. Then we don't do anything about it. And that's why super terrorists continue to invade America.
There are illegal immigrants pouring into this country every day, and any one of them could be a super terrorist.
Many are calling for more superheroes in order to counter the super terrorist threat and protect Americans.
What is the government doing about this?
Thanks.
All of us.
Have a good day, hon.
Stand up right now. I am sick of waiting for some executive to finish his racket.
We are going to hold hearings unbought and
it's 1:45.
I'm going to tell you something I probably shouldn't. I'm going to tell you something that the government doesn't want you.
And they want more super terrorists. That's
when people are pointing out that the rush to judgment by the left.
Victoria Newman's accusation.
No offense. I get you
have a good day, hon.
But why does it matter what some super villain loving snowflake has? Every minute we waste. One super terrorist has already got through. More will come.
It's 1:45.
And I mean, for all we know, these maniacs could have already flown over our borders and be standing next to you right now, just waiting for their chance to kill us all. Keep America safe again, and I'm so glad that I was there this time. But what about you? I am counting on you.
Have a good day, hon.
Every minute we wait. No, it's up to us. We have to make our voices heard. That is why there's a list. The people. Let's show them. I am counting on you to show us the way. Don't let me down.
A new report released by an international journalist association has noted
I saw the light in your eyes. Just take the money. You one of them? You fucking supervillain? What? Are you bulletproof, motherfucker? Please, I have a family, please.
So there you see this, kid who's having a lot of interaction on social media, which isn't a bad thing, but you saw a lot of messaging that we talked about from those extremist groups that are red flags about recruitment. Things like there's an enemy, there is a threat to you and you have to fight the threat, and it's up to you. You are the one who needs to fight this domestic enemy. And it's not just extremist groups that will espouse that. You'll see a lot of that sort of messaging on social media, and that's sort of part of the social media path to extremism, is a lot of that same overlapping messaging. You might have heard this saying before: if the product is free, you are the product. So Facebook, Instagram, a lot of these social media platforms are free for you to use because they get value from you using the platform. So from you interacting with their advertisements, watching ads, that they want you to stay on their platform because that's how they make money. And the way that they get you to stay on that platform is by feeding you or incentivizing more extreme behavior, because that's what gets you to interact. If people see a post that is mild or doesn't particularly inflame or provoke, you're just going to scroll past it. But if you see someone that is saying something dramatic or starting an argument, then that's something that's more likely to get you to start clicking or commenting. And that's all behavior that makes you stay on the platform longer and makes you more profitable to Facebook, YouTube, whatever else. That keep in mind that these organizations are aware of this also, that they deliberately incentivize these sort of behaviors that will keep you on the platform. Like the same scientists who used to work for Las Vegas, designing casinos to keep you there for longer, are the same behavioral experts that are being, employed by social media companies to get them to incentivize and bring out this same behavior that keeps you on the platform. So, seeing these, like on the left there, these dramatic thumbnails of, oh my God, look at this. And maybe you've noticed that that's a lot more common on YouTube lately, because that algorithm is built to identify that crazy dramatic thumbnails and, overemphasized, over dramatic titles, clickbait, that's what gets interaction. So it incentivizes people on the platform to create content like that. That's, is what gets more clicks and what keeps you on the platform. And these platforms know this. They didn't stumble into this by accident. They know that by incentivizing certain behavior, that they get more interaction and thus more ad revenue from their websites, from their online platforms. So here we have some different results from studies and watchdog groups, that Facebook was aware that different aspects of its platform incentivized radicalized behavior and extremist behavior, but they allowed it to keep going because ultimately Facebook makes money off of that. That they make money off of people being on their platform and looking at the advertisements or engaging with the ads that are in that extremist Facebook group. And as we were able to see earlier, it wasn't until some of these groups started engaging in violence in the real world that Facebook finally took those groups down, like, for example, the Boogaloo Boys online groups. And an example of how YouTube can feed into this and how unexpected videos can take you to other places adjacent to extremism is that there's a relatively straightforward path to, if you start watching a video for God of War and keep looking at some of those, you're going to start getting some recommendations for Norse mythology, and that can end up leading you to another facet of YouTube, which is modern Norse mythology, or modern engagement with heathenism. It's sort of having a bit of a resurgence lately as a real religion that people partake in. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being, engaging with these types of videos here. But these types of videos start to run adjacent to white supremacy. And you'll actually, if you end up, doing a deep dive over here, sometimes you'll run into these, perfectly benign people hanging out, enjoying their religion that they've chosen for themselves. And they'll have to do like disclaimers, like, hey, I've noticed some commenters who are doing some engaging with some like white supremacy tenets, and I don't support that. So you'll see that this isn't necessarily bad here, but it is the end result of some algorithmic escalation from YouTube that ends up running parallel or running in the same neighborhood of extremist views. So none of these steps are inherently bad, and engaging with these sort of materials on YouTube or social media isn't inherently bad, but just be aware that there is an escalation that takes place on social media and on YouTube because the algorithm wants you to stay on the platform, and that can lead you to different seedy neighborhoods online that can result in extremism. So here is some numbers from a study out of Stanford that they wrote a program that took in information about the recommendations from YouTube. So these are just straight statistical numbers that if you end up on conspiracy channels on YouTube, then you probably came from partisan right-leaning channels. So the most common place that you came from was if you were finding yourself on QAnon conspiracy videos, you probably got a recommendation coming from a partisan right channel or from another conspiracy channel, and then also from religious conservative channels. That doesn't mean that partisan right or religious conservative videos make you an extremist. Just be aware that you may start getting recommendations for QAnon conspiracies. Same for just conspiracy channels, that if you are on those types of groups, even on mainstream media, be aware that even if you're just watching normal CNN videos, that you're going to start getting recommendations or may start getting recommendations on your YouTube channel about conspiracy videos and conspiracy channels. So this is just some more of that interconnectedness, and just want you to be aware of the places that even benign YouTube videos, just perfectly fine YouTube videos, can lead you to different flavors of extremism. And it's also not, of course, only right-leaning, because as we can see, if you end up on socialist channels, that you probably got there from a partisan left-leaning or social justice channel on YouTube. And socialist channels on YouTube can mean a lot of different things. Everything from, I think Amazon should pay more taxes, to I think we need to overthrow the government and start over. So there's, just a lot of paths on YouTube that even if you're in okay places, you can be led through the algorithmic recommendations to extremism.
Checkpoint number 4, looking at Delta 67 D67. Checkpoint number 4.
And here are some of the reasons why people latch on to extremism or conspiracy groups. One reason is it makes you the hero of the story. That if you're just, going about your day, like think back to that video of the kid looking at all the social media, extremism earlier, that he's just some guy who lives with his mom and goes to school every day. But now by latching on to all of these, sort of more conspiracy-laden social media groups, he's able to be the hero, that all of these groups are telling him that he needs to fight something, that America is under a threat and he's the one who needs to save it. And it also gives you validation. You're a part of this group and you can, get in on what is normal for them to say, and then if you start saying those same extremist things, they're going to clap for you about it. They're going to be giving you a bunch of likes, telling you that you're totally right, because you're engaging with their extremist views. And now you're a member of that group and they're going to give support for you. And you have like a clear purpose in life all of a sudden. It used to be that, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, my dead-end job, but now there's an enemy for you to fight against because you know what the real story is. Everybody else is just walking around doing whatever, but you know that there's this tangible threat and you have to fight it. So all of these are reasons why people end up latching on to extremism and radicalization online, because it gives you purpose, it gives you validation, it takes your normal life and turns it into like this battle that you're now engaged in. And all of that is something that feeds into some of the crazier conspiracies out there, like the QAnon conspiracy. So look at these photos here. You see, we've all seen this crazy guy on the left, storming the Capitol. But look on the right. Look at this grandma here. How did she end up, going to an event, dressed up, showing off that she's involved with this conspiracy? So I'd like you to take a moment and read these accounts from family members who have lost a loved one to the QAnon conspiracy. And I say lost a loved one, they're not dead, but they have cut themselves out of their family because of believing in this conspiracy. And here again, almost similar to the guy who was setting himself on fire earlier, you're not building bombs or anything, but cutting yourself off from your family or making it so your family needs to cut yourself off from you, that's extremism. So anything that leads you to that place is also some form of radicalization. So again, people are attracted to the QAnon conspiracy because it's a group that gives them validation. They get to know what's really going on in the world and they get to be a hero. But it leads people to these types of dreadful places. So if you see a family member kind of going down these paths and getting a little bit more crazy about these issues, here's some things that you can do to work on that and bring them back into the fold, which is maintain a connection with them, going back to some of the aspects of the Army family and having a family plan, checking in on your soldiers in between battle assemblies. Continue to engage with that person, especially in things that don't involve talking about whatever that cause is, whatever those specific politics are that are causing them to really get riled up. But also address it directly and just have a conversation with them saying, hey, I can't help but notice, but you're way more passionate about this subject than you used to be, and it's causing you to behave in weird ways, and I'm feeling like there are some red flags going on here. And also be aware that the same thing can be happening to you. So this isn't just about finding red flags in other people, it's about identifying red flags inside of yourself. So recognize when there is some sort of source online telling you that there's a threat or a danger or an enemy that you have to fight against. Be aware that if there's a source saying that you can't trust other sources, that's because they want you to narrow in on only getting information from them. That is always a red flag if there is an online source that is telling you not to trust other sources of information. Because as we saw from that slide a few moments ago, is that can lead to you can't even trust your family. Now, also recognize when your behavior is changing. If you're getting more agitated than you used to about a subject, then be aware that change is happening. Now, sometimes that's justified. Sometimes you learn more about a subject and it does require some more of your attention, and you do feel like you need to, write your senator about something. But be aware if you're escalating to the level that thinking, I've got to fight somebody over this. And then again, maintain connections with people around you. Keep connections with your Army family, maintain friendships, because these are also going to be the people who give you a little bit of a head check. Be like, hey buddy, you're acting kind of crazy lately since you've been watching that. Oh, you've been watching that YouTube? I don't know about that. So this is just another way to maintain connection with others so you don't become desperate for connections that extremist groups online may be trying to provide for you. And with that brings us to the end of your extremism online training. This will satisfy your training requirement for the Extremism Stand Down. And with that, we also have our final passcode.
For your fifth and final checkpoint, R55, Romeo 55.
And now you finished training, report this up to your first line supervisor, and thanks for participating in the training. Be on the lookout for extremism. Don't let extremism happen to you.